Let's check the mail. How many Stella Fortunas do I have? Is this it? Go to character screen. Oh my god. So let's talk about level 90, level 95, and level 100, and roughly what you can expect in terms of damage gains and just utility and benefit in order to break a character's level limit. So we have this Ascension limit button here in the bottom right, which if you click on it, you can spend these Masterless Stella Fortunas in order to bring up your character from level 90 to 95. And fortunately for those of you guys who have whaled, and unfortunately for those of you guys who have not, well, you get these by getting a 5-star character at Constellation 6, another constellation for them. And this gets converted to the Masterless Stella Fortuna. And you might be looking at this and you see 133 Masterless Stella Fortunas, and you are probably wondering what I did in life to somehow end up in this situation, and that is a very good question. I don't know either. And what's crazy is I started this session at 160. We can see here that what it does is it increases a character's base HP, base attack, and base defense. So also one thing to know about bringing characters up to level 95 and level 100 is that their talent levels do not change. They still stay at whatever it was, and you cannot level them up past level 10, or I guess 13 if you have, you know, constellations 3 and 5. And for each of these characters, it just kind of provides different levels of benefits. Like, for example, when we're talking about Bennett, when you increase him from level 90 to 95, it increases his base attack. Here we go, level 95 Bennett. He only gains 25 base attack, actually, from this. Our first character, let's go. Level 95. He gained 25 base attack, which of course increases his attack buff. And his attack buff, and you can see it's a very modest increase from 1,202 flat attack. And as we can see for my Mavuika specifically, where it's likely that, you know, Bennett's buff will be, this specific part of Bennett's buff will be a little bit less impactful on my Mavuika because my Mavuika is at C6R5. But my Mavuika was experiencing roughly 0.5% of gain for, you know, each 5 levels from Bennett. Not a crazy amount of damage, but, you know, if you're a whale like me with 160 Masterless Stella Fortunas and a very sad wallet, then you can consider doing it for improving whatever character Bennett might be slotted on, their damage output. Yeah, and of course, different characters will gain a lot of different things. The next test that I did was with Mavuika, and we can see her stats increase. And there's one little thing to point out with this page that you see here. This base attack includes their weapon equipped. Slightly confusing because, yeah, if to get the true base attack and base attack, final base attack values for just the character, you'd have to subtract the weapon's base attack. In this case, I don't know what I was smoking, but I was smoking something fine because Navi is using the Forest Regalio. You can see Mavuika's character's base attack has increased from 358 all the way up to, 399 up to 439. My Mavuika, because she's a whale Mavuika, gains less from this than, for example, many other players might experience. And also she's with Bennett, and Bennett provides this flat attack buff, which also dilutes Mavuika's gain. So Mavuika gained base attack, 40 base attack here and there, and that will of course increase her attack number, but Bennett's buff plus Mavuika's Constellation 2, which provides 200 base attack as well, also dilutes this. So my Mavuika in a full team scenario, and also Sitlali's Constellation 1 dilutes this by a bit. Only gained 3.6% going from 90 to 95, and going from 90 to 100, a total of 7.2% increase in gain. And if we factor in all 6 Stella Fortuna spent, we spent 3 on Bennett, 3 on Mavuika. Then a level 100 Mavuika team did about 8.16% more damage in comparison to a level 90 Bennett, level 90 Mavuika team. So the next batch of characters I want to talk about are HP scaling characters. We have Mualani. Okay, here we go. Ascension time, level 95 Mualani, let's go. We have characters like Fiorina, Neuvillette, Yelan. All of these characters gain almost the exact same amount of percentage in their HP. All of these characters tend to gain around 3.5 to 3.5% per 5 levels. Okay, because they scale entirely off their HP and there's not many flat damage sources that dilute it, like no flat attack buffs, no flat base damage buffs, no flat damage buffs. Because of that, you have a much more kind of one-to-one scaling in comparison, and it's much more consistent for HP scalers. She gained 4.1% going from 90 to 95, 8.3% going from 90 to 100. So the next most interesting one, in my opinion, is actually the transformative reaction gain. And I did this test with Raiden, going from level 90 to 95, then from 95 to 100. And Hyperbloom, just basically a raw Hyperbloom, raw dog Hyperbloom. Raiden's Hyperbloom increased by 8%, going from 90 to 95, and increased by 15.8%, going from 90 to 100. So it is a very substantial gain, and this is corroborated by Overloaded's damage gain. We can see that it did 15.8% more damage with Overloaded, and same with Hyperbloom. So I'm making the assumption that all the transformative reactions work this way, but I can very least confidently say at least Hyperbloom and Overloaded do, which to me is good enough to make that educated assumption. You might look at this and you might think, okay, this is a huge boost, and it is a very substantial boost. Like, not as much as like modern constellations, of course, but it's definitely, you know, a pretty substantial boost. But we do have now flat bloom damage sources. So let's say your Lalma adds 5,000 flat damage to Hyperbloom in this situation. Then this gets diluted down to about 7% or 13.7% roughly increase to Hyperbloom's damage. Still significant, right? But you can see that as we add things that might potentially dilute bloom damage or whatever reaction damage. In this case, it's really only applicable to bloom damage because Lalma's the only one that adds flat reaction damage off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure no one else does, but if someone else does, correct me. But yeah, so because we might also see more sources of flat reaction damage increase, we might not, but either way, if you have Lalma, this increase is much less substantial, so do keep that in mind. Then the next test we did is actually probably jumped around a little bit, but let's talk about Skirk. Wanted to do just a raw attack scaling character without interference from a bunch of other miscellaneous buffs. This is actually interesting because if we actually put Skirk on a worse weapon, this would perform even better because you have a higher percentage increase to the base attack. But I had Skirk on her signature weapon, the Azure Light, and as we can see with no other shenanigans, Skirk's Elemental Burst, the small slash, did 5% more damage going from 90 to 95, and 10% more damage going from 90 to 100. Shenhe will also dilute this because she has flat damage. Escoffier's Constellation 2, if you have that, will dilute this because she also adds flat damage. So do keep that in mind. There's many sources that will dilute Skirk's, gain from this. And when you look at most of the attack scalers, they kind of have this issue. Although they gain a pretty large increase because of things like Bennett, because of things like Shenhe, these things that add flat attack and these things that add, for example, flat damage, they will dilute this buff and it won't be as substantial. It's probably somewhere between 3 and 4%, I would estimate, for these attack scaling characters due to these various flat damage buffs that they get. And the next character I tested is Ineffa. Ineffa is really messy to test, so I tried my best to equalize it, and of course I messed up. So we only have 95 to 100, but we can expect it to roughly double if we, go from 90 to 100 instead. But going from 95 to 100 was interesting because Ineffa, in her case, gained a 3.8% increase to her passive, which deals lunar-charged damage, and this is significantly lower than, for example, the others. And I believe there are multiple reasons for this. It's about the same as Mavuika's, I guess. But one of the reasons is because she scales primarily off of her base attack. So if we go from this 3.8% increase. Oh, actually, it perfectly matches this. Yes, it perfectly matches this, which makes sense. So we can see here that Ineffa gained a a 3.8% increase, which scaled directly off of her base attack stat. And this makes perfect sense because Lunar Charge damage ignores the defense multiplier. Even though they have very similar gains, Skirk gains the benefit of improving the defense percent multiplier because Skirk's level was increased, whereas Ineffa's Lunar Charge damage does not gain that benefit. So she gains a bit less damage than Skirk in this case. Then we did a couple dual scaling characters. Chiori scaling off of attack percent and defense. Chiori here was interesting because she's a dual scaler, and we can see it's still roughly about the same as the other characters, between 4 to 5% gain. And we're starting to see a pretty clear pattern here for these characters, and this is roughly what you can just expect. Chiori, a dual scaler, we can see very similar gains, slightly better than, for example, even Mualani, a pure HP scaler, which I found interesting. I don't really have a perfect explanation for it, but hey, it is what it is. It's somewhere in between. So that's kind of interesting. Then we have Nahida. Nahida is interesting because she is primarily a spread damage dealer. And here we measure the Tri-Karma Purification spread. And we can see that this one went up by about 5.3%. And I don't actually remember the scaling for spread, but I think it's based off of a similar base damage formula scaling as transformative reactions. It's not the exact same. She actually gained a pretty decent amount, but she also scales off of elemental mastery and attack percent. While the elemental mastery portion did not continue to scale up, the rest of it did, which led to, Nahida dealing, noticeably more damage, which is pretty nice for her. Okay, and I think as we can see, we can expect roughly a 3.5% to 5-ish% increase for most characters relying on their personal damage output per, 90 to 95, per 95 to 100. And then for transformative reactions, if it's just the raw transformative reaction without Lalma, you can expect a much more impressive 8% increase per 5 level breakpoint. First of all, fortunately, these damage gains from leveling up to 100 aren't insane or anything like that. And 3 to 10-ish% for characters that rely on their personal damage isn't game-breaking by any means. Keep in mind that in pretty much every team, even if you buff, let's say Mavuika to level 100, the rest of the team still does damage, and thus Mavuika's damage increase will be diluted a bit. As for the increase to transformative reactions being around 8 to 16%, while it is good, we will likely see potentially more things that dilute this buff, such as flat bloom damage, and those reactions, let's be honest, weren't the most meta ones to begin with, not scaling super well into the late game. Now, you might have been hoping for me to just tell you, hey, this is who you should level to 95 or level to 100, and unfortunately, I don't really have a great answer for that, at least not yet. What I can say though is that overall, many supports don't benefit from this as much. Characters such as Sitlali, Lalma, or even Bennett won't see nearly as large of improvements to their supporting capabilities in comparison to, for example, most DPS characters with the damage that they gain. With that being said, if I were a player with just a few of these, I would honestly be patient and use them on characters whom I feel like could use that last little bump to clear a difficulty in Stage and Onslaught, or who just happen to be my favorite DPS characters, or for the next most meta and most broken DPS character that comes along. Overall, this system isn't anything game-breaking in terms of the damage gains, but it definitely can instill FOMO for players that didn't manage to get many of these. Let me know who you plan to level to 100 or 95 down in the comments below. And here's an exclusive 60 Primogems code for you all because you liked and subscribed. Just check the description for a link to it and or the code itself. There you go. That's what I've learned from, experimenting with all the money that I've wasted over these years collecting these Masterless Stella Fortuna. Okay, I am tired. I think that's about it. So yeah, that's about it. So it's not as crazy of a damage increase, and you also have to keep in mind that these characters' solo damage output. And what that means is that in a full team scenario where other characters are realistically doing a non-negligible amount of damage, these increases become even more diluted. So you do want to take that into consideration as well. So it's not like the most insane thing you've seen, But it is, I guess, a nice consolation prize for players that managed to get Constellation 10 Chi-Chi over the years that were very salty when it happened. But here you go. You got a nice little, I guess, bonus thanks to Chi-Chi cursing you from the grave. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.